Danielle Morgan had been to plenty of fancy business dinners in her career, but this one felt different. The invitation alone made that clear. Thick cream cardstock, embossed lettering, the kind of thing you'd expect for a wedding, not a corporate meet and greet. The event was being held at the Lakeshore Grand, one of Chicago's most historic hotels, where the chandeliers looked like they had been hanging since the days of horse-drawn carriages. She arrived a little before 7 in the evening, wearing a dark navy suit tailored just for her. It wasn't just about looking the part, it was about armour. In her line of work, being a black woman in a room full of powerful men who didn't look like her, she had learned that first impressions were everything. The deal on the table was worth $200 million. It would open doors for her tech company in ways nothing else could. Danielle had built her business from the ground up, working out of her small apartment with a used laptop and a stubborn refusal to quit. Tonight was supposed to be the celebration, the night she finally got the kind of partnership she'd dreamed of. The moment she stepped into the ballroom, she felt the shift. Conversations slowed. Eyes followed her as she made her way to the table reserved for the evening's special guests. She caught snippets of polite greetings, the kind that carried more formality than warmth. It wasn't new to her, but it never stopped stinging. The hosts, Harper & Cole, one of the largest luxury retail groups in the country, had spared no expense. Tall centerpieces of white roses towered over the tables. Crystal glasses sparkled under the soft golden light. But it wasn't the decor Danielle noticed. It was the man across the room. Michael Cole Jr., the son of the company's founder, was leaning against the bar, drink in hand, chatting with a small circle of executives. He glanced her way, and she could feel the weight of his stare. Then, with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes, he lifted his glass and called out just loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Guess they're letting the waitstaff join the party early tonight." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough. Enough to burn through her carefully built composure. She stood there for a moment, the comment hanging in the air like smoke, the clink of glasses filling the silence no one dared break. Not one of the men beside him said a word to correct him. Danielle's fingers tightened around her clutch. She felt the old familiar ache in her chest, the one that came every time someone tried to shrink her down to where they thought she belonged. She forced a small, polite smile, the kind that didn't give away a single crack, and walked toward the table as if she hadn't heard a thing. But inside, something had shifted. This wasn't just another offhand remark. This was a choice. His choice to humiliate her, and their choice to let it happen. And Danielle Morgan had never been the kind of woman to stay quiet for long. Dinner service began, but Danielle could barely taste a thing. The waiter placed a delicate salad in front of her, all baby greens and tiny edible flowers, the kind of dish that looked better than it filled you. She picked at it, nodding politely when someone across the table asked about her recent trip to San Francisco. Her voice was steady, her smile in place, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. The comment from Michael Cole Jr. replayed in her head like a bad song on repeat. She'd dealt with plenty of ignorance before, microaggressions in boardrooms, subtle slights at industry events, but there was nothing subtle about what had happened tonight. And the worst part wasn't even the insult, it was the silence that followed, the way grown men, leaders of a billion-dollar company, sat there with their eyes on their plates, pretending they hadn't heard a thing. Her phone buzzed quietly in her clutch. A message from her assistant. "Everything okay?" Danielle took a slow sip of water before replying, "Fine, call you tomorrow." It wasn't a lie, exactly. She was fine in the sense that she wasn't going to cry in the middle of a ballroom. But inside, a decision was starting to take root. The rest of the meal passed in a blur. Filet mignon, polite small talk, a toast from the elder Cole about new beginnings. Danielle clapped along with everyone else, but she could feel her jaw tightening. She wasn't sure if she was more insulted by Michael's words or by the idea that this dinner was supposed to be her reward for years of hard work. When dessert was served, a glossy chocolate tart that would have impressed any foodie, Danielle pushed back her chair. "Excuse me," she said softly, standing with the same quiet confidence she'd carried into every hard room in her career. She didn't look at Michael. She didn't look at his father. She simply gathered her things, thanked the nearest server, and walked out. The cool night air hit her face like a reset button. Chicago's streets buzzed with life, cars honking, laughter spilling from nearby bars, but she barely heard any of it. She stood under the glow of the hotel's awning, breathing in the crisp air. $200 million, years of planning, all of it balanced on a single choice. And for the first time that night, Danielle felt a flicker of clarity. This wasn't about the deal anymore. This was about who she was and who she refused to become. She reached for her phone. It was time to make some calls. Danielle didn't sleep much that night. She sat on her living room couch with the city lights spilling through the windows, her heels kicked off in the corner, the untouched leftovers from dinner still in their to-go bag on the counter. She'd replayed every second of the evening, not because she wanted to, but because her mind wouldn't let it go. She thought about the early days of her company, late nights coding at her kitchen table, eating instant noodles because there wasn't enough money for anything else. She thought about the doors that had been slammed in her face, the investors who smiled politely but passed without a second glance, and the rare few who believed in her enough to write that first check. Every win had been earned the hard way. And tonight, in one careless sentence, someone had tried to make all of that invisible. By the time the sky began to turn pale, Danielle had made up her mind. She called a meeting with her leadership team for that afternoon. No emails, no agenda, just a request to be in the conference room by 2. When they gathered, she told them everything. Not just the words Michael had said, but the silence that followed. She described the way the room had felt smaller, the way she'd been made to feel like she didn't belong, even though she was the one bringing the deal to the table. Her CFO was the first to speak. "It's $200 million, he said carefully, as if reminding her of the weight of the decision. "Walking away would be—" "A loss?" Danielle interrupted. "Maybe, but what's the cost of staying? What's the cost of telling every woman, every person watching us that this is fine as long as the money's good?" The room fell quiet. It wasn't the silence from the ballroom. This one felt different. This was the kind of quiet that comes when people are thinking, really thinking. Finally, her head of operations leaned forward. "If you're asking us whether we'll back you, you already know the answer." And just like that, Danielle knew she wasn't making this choice alone. That night, she drafted a statement. Not angry, not defensive, just clear. She'd learned a long time ago that you don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to mean every word. The next morning, Danielle stood in front of her bathroom mirror, fastening the buttons on a cream-coloured blazer she'd saved for important moments. No bold jewellery, no dramatic makeup. Today wasn't about drawing attention. It was about being steady, clear, and unshakable. By 9 o'clock, her team had booked a small conference room at a downtown hotel. The backdrop was plain, the lighting soft, but professional. A handful of reporters waited as she walked in, the sound of their cameras clicking faint but constant. She stepped up to the podium, a single sheet of paper in her hand. She didn't need to read it. She knew exactly what she was here to say. "When respect is missing," she began, her voice calm but certain, "there is no deal worth signing. I am formally ending negotiations with Harper & Cole, effective immediately." For a moment the room was still. Then came the questions, fast, pointed, overlapping. Was she concerned about the financial loss? Would she reconsider? What exactly had happened? Danielle didn't flinch. "Some things can't be measured on a balance sheet," she replied. "This isn't about walking away from money. It's about walking toward the kind of future my company believes in, a future built on mutual respect." She didn't name names. She didn't repeat the insult. She didn't have to. Her tone said enough. After a few brief answers, she thanked the reporters and left. By the time she stepped into the quiet of the hotel lobby, her phone was already buzzing. Emails, texts, and notifications stacking up faster than she could read them. Somewhere out there, people were already talking. She could feel it. And she had no idea just how far the story was about to travel. Danielle didn't even make it back to her office before the call started. Her driver had barely pulled out of the hotel driveway when her assistant's voice came through on speaker. "It's already everywhere," she said. "Your statement, the video from the press conference, People are sharing it like wildfire. By the time she walked into the lobby of her building, her inbox was overflowing. News outlets were requesting interviews. Strangers were sending messages of support. And tucked between them all was a link from a name she only vaguely remembered, a woman she'd met at a tech event years ago. The link led to a LinkedIn post. It wasn't long, just a few paragraphs about being in the ballroom that night, about hearing the remark, and about the silence that followed. The post ended with one sentence: "Respect isn't a perk, it's the entry price." The comments were already in the hundreds. People weren't just talking about what had happened to Danielle, they were sharing their own stories of being underestimated or dismissed. Within hours, the post spread from LinkedIn to Twitter, Instagram, and into evening news segments. Then came the moment that would light the fire even hotter. Another guest from that night had recorded the exchange, the smirk, the remark, the ripple of awkward laughter. The footage wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. You could see the way Danielle's expression didn't falter, even as the room shifted around her. By the next morning, the clip had been viewed over 1 million times. Hashtags were trending. People were calling her choice bold, necessary, overdue. But what struck Danielle most wasn't the headlines. It was the quiet, personal messages that kept coming in. Notes from people she'd never met, telling her they'd finally found the courage to speak up or walk away from situations where they weren't respected. As she read them, Danielle realised this was no longer about a single deal. It was about something far bigger, and it had only just begun. By the third day, the story had taken on a life of its own. News anchors debated it on morning shows, business podcasts dissected it, and opinion pieces filled the front pages of online magazines. Harper & Cole's public relations team scrambled to contain the damage, but every statement they released seemed to make things worse. The words felt polished, scripted, empty. Their stock price began to slide. First a little, then a lot. Analysts on financial networks spoke in calm voices about brand perception and consumer trust, but the undercurrent was clear. People were angry. Boycotts started trending, customers were posting photos of themselves returning products, and longtime partners were re-evaluating their relationship with the company. Danielle watched it all from a distance. She hadn't given another interview, hadn't made another public statement. Her silence was deliberate. She didn't want to feed the fire. She wanted people to focus on the message, not on her. But staying quiet didn't mean doing nothing. Behind the scenes, she and her team sifted through the partnership offers that kept coming in. Some were from companies she'd admired for years, ones she knew had cultures built on the kind of respect she demanded. Others were from startups hungry to work with someone who wouldn't compromise her values. Late one afternoon, she stepped outside her office for some air. The sun was dipping low over the Chicago skyline, painting the glass buildings gold. She thought about the risk she'd taken, how easily this could have gone the other way. She could have been called reckless. She could have been told she'd thrown away the opportunity of a lifetime. Instead, strangers were stopping her on the street to say thank you. One young woman, barely out of college, approached her shyly on the sidewalk. "I saw your video," she said. I needed to see someone actually walk away. It made me feel like maybe I could too." Danielle smiled, the weight in her chest easing just a little. She knew then that whatever happened next, whichever deal she signed, whichever doors opened, it had already been worth it. The invitation came a week later. Danielle was sitting at her desk, reviewing a contract from one of the new potential partners, when her assistant slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a simple cream-coloured card with gold lettering, an invitation to speak at the National Women in Business Summit in New York, the keynote slot. She stared at it for a moment, almost amused. A week ago, her biggest focus had been sealing a deal with Harper & Cole. Now, she was being asked to stand on stage in front of thousands of women from across the country, many of them leaders in their own right, to talk about the very moment she had walked away. Part of her wanted to say no. She wasn't looking to turn this into a victory lap. But another part of her, the part that remembered every closed-door meeting where she'd been the only one who looked like her, knew it mattered. 2 weeks later, she found herself backstage at a grand hotel ballroom in Manhattan. The hum of conversation drifted in from the audience. mingling with the faint clinking of coffee cups and the shuffle of programs. When her name was announced, the applause was warm, almost protective. She stepped up to the podium, the lights soft but steady, and let the room settle. She began not with the insult, but with the truth behind it. The years of work, the late nights, the quiet battles no one saw. She spoke about the moment in the ballroom, yes, but more about the silence that followed and what that silence represented. When you sit at a table, she told them, you are not there as a favour. You are there because you earned it. And if the people around you can't see that, it's not your job to shrink until you fit their vision. It's your job to stand and walk away. The room was still. Some women nodded, others wiped at their eyes. She ended simply, without drama. The cost of dignity is high, but losing it will cost you more. The applause rose slowly, then all at once, filling the space. Danielle smiled, not because she felt triumphant, but because she felt understood. After the summit, Danielle stayed behind for nearly an hour, talking with women who had flown in from every corner of the country. Some ran companies, others were just starting side businesses from their kitchen tables. They thanked her not for being perfect, but for being real, for showing that it was possible to walk away and still stand tall. By the time she reached her hotel, her heels were in one hand, her phone in the other. She dropped onto the armchair by the window and watched the city lights glitter below. Notifications kept lighting up her screen. Emails, messages, tags on social media. Some were short. Proud of you. Others came with long, heartfelt stories of moments when they had stayed quiet, and how her words had made them wish they hadn't. One message stopped her cold. It was from a high school student in Detroit. The girl wrote, "I saw your speech in my business class. I didn't know you could say no to something so big and still be okay. Now I think I might start my own business someday." Danielle read it twice, feeling that same deep ache in her chest she'd felt on stage earlier that day. She set her phone down and leaned back, letting the city's hum fill the quiet. Somewhere out there, people were still talking about the insult, the deal, the decision. But here, in this moment, what mattered was that her story had reached someone who needed it, someone she would probably never meet. The next morning, she packed her bag and headed for the airport. She was going home to Chicago, carrying more than just her luggage. She was carrying a new sense of purpose, and the weight of stories from strangers who now felt braver because of her. Chicago felt different when Danielle returned, though she knew the streets, the skyline, and the cold wind off the lake hadn't changed at all. The difference was in her. She walked into her office with the weight of those stories still with her, from seasoned business owners to high school students who now saw possibility where they hadn't before. Her team welcomed her back with coffee and quick updates, but it was clear they'd been busy while she was away. The inquiries hadn't slowed. If anything, they'd multiplied. Offers were coming in from companies Danielle had admired for years, and from scrappy startups eager to work with someone who wouldn't compromise her principles. That afternoon, she gathered her leadership team around the long wooden table in the conference room. There was no slideshow, no formal agenda. "We're going to be intentional about what comes next," she told them. "We're not just chasing numbers. Every deal we make has to reflect who we are and who we're becoming." They went through proposals one by one, not just discussing profit margins but asking harder questions. Do we trust these people? Do they treat their own teams well? Would we be proud to put our name beside theirs? Danielle said no more than once, even to offers that could have doubled their revenue. When the meeting wrapped, the office began to quiet for the day. Danielle stayed behind, standing by the window as the city lights began to flicker on below. She thought about that night in the ballroom, the remark meant to shrink her, and how walking away had somehow made her world bigger. It no longer felt like the end of a chapter. It felt like she had turned the page and discovered an entirely new story waiting for her to write it. A month after that night in the ballroom, Danielle found herself walking into a small community centre on the south side of the city. It wasn't a planned event, just a quiet visit arranged by a friend who taught an entrepreneurship workshop there. The room was filled with young people, some barely out of high school, others juggling side jobs while trying to get their ideas off the ground. When she stepped inside, they recognised her, not in the celebrity kind of way, but with the warmth you give someone whose story you've been telling to your friends. They asked about her company, about what it was really like to turn down something so big, and whether she'd been scared. Yes, she admitted, I was scared, but I was more scared of what I'd become if I stayed in a place that didn't value me. Money comes and goes, your name, your word, your dignity, those are things you have to protect even when it's hard. After the workshop, a young man lingered as the others left. He was quiet at first, then said, I used to think people like me didn't get to choose who we worked with. We just had to take whatever we could get. But you made me realise, maybe I can choose too. Danielle smiled, resting a hand on his shoulder. You can, and you should. That evening, walking back to her car, she thought about how much had changed in such a short time. The deal she'd walked away from was just one moment in a long career, but it had turned into something far bigger than she ever imagined. It had reminded her, and maybe a lot of other people, that power doesn't just live in boardrooms or contracts. Sometimes it's in the quiet act of standing up, walking away, and trusting that you'll find something better. As the sun dipped low and the city lights began to glow, Danielle felt a deep, steady calm. She didn't know what her next big deal would be, but she knew one thing for certain: whatever it was, it would be on her terms. And that was worth more than any number on a check. True value isn't in the number on a contract. It's in having the courage to protect your dignity and principles. When you know how to say no to places that don't respect you, you open the door to better opportunities on your own terms. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. I truly appreciate it. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more. I'll see you again on Rain Inside.